At this time, I'd like to invite Mr. Phil Solomon, Regional Manager at ICS, Mr. Todd Rapp, CEO of Rapp Strategies, and Mr. Peter Leatherman, CEO of the Morris Leatherman Company, to provide an update on Abington School District's future facilities planning.
Okay, well, thank you for having us back. I'm Phil Solomon from ICS. I have David Schrader with me as well. And Todd Rapp is online. Unfortunately, he's not feeling so well, so he didn't want to come here and cough and sneeze. But he'll be presenting most of this. In many ways, this is the culmination of a 2-year process. And what we have tonight is quite a bit of information that we've culled from surveys and scientific surveys and tools such as Thought Exchange. So we are very excited to present this, and hopefully you'll find it very informative. And then obviously we'll be available for questions afterwards. With that, I was going to hand it over to Mr. Rapp to start the presentation.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, members of the Board of School Directors, Dr. Fetcher and staff. I'm Todd Rapp from Rapp Strategies. You've heard from me before on the various issues during the planning process here. Peter Leatherman sends his apologies. Just a reminder that the Morris Leatherman Company, they're the ones who conduct the field work, draw the sample, are responsible for all data collection and data quality on this type of research work. And then Peter and I work together to analyze the results of the survey. Peter has been through the slide presentation carefully, and he agrees 100% with the findings that we're providing here and the recommendation at the end. If we could move on to the next slide. Just a reminder that this was really the last step of public input that the Board of School Directors and the administration requested as part of your planning process, trying to understand what investments you should be making in your facilities. This began back in November of 2023. And as you can tell from the diagram here, we've taken a number of different steps over time, adding certain information for the public to be able to increase their knowledge and get a fuller understanding of what the project is. We had an earlier survey, a scientific survey that was conducted in January of 2024, which was complemented by an online survey that was open for any member of the public to take. We replicated that here in December of 2024, a different survey, but once again, we offered an online version of that for any resident to be able to take, just to make sure that no one feels like that they've been excluded from the process of providing input to the board. Ultimately, all this information has come together in the assessments, analysis that we've done, the development of the options, and ultimately now providing this information from your residents to help you with your decision. Next slide. So the core of what you're going to see here is the scientific survey. The methodology of this was 500 adults, and the adults reflect the demographics of the Abington School District. This is really the only type of research that we can do that we can tell you that demographically the sample represents demographically the 44,000 some adults who live in this district. It is a telephone survey that was conducted in December. You see there the statistics on what percentage of the sample was cell phone only. And you should look at the data as a margin of error of plus or minus 4.5%. As we compared the demographics of the earlier survey with this survey, we saw only one distinction. And that is that the sample was slightly less Democratic and slightly more Republican than the sample we saw in January 2024. If we all think about the November election, that probably makes a little bit of sense for the sample here, as you had a different performance level for the two parties in the 2024 election than we saw in 2022, for example. The original survey we did in January was focused on identifying the right strategies to study. It was really a look at what people thought of their current schools and what are some of the challenges they were facing. Here, we're really trying to help you pick the right plan to submit to voters. And so the questions were somewhat different. Phil, let's start walking through those questions. One of the most striking things we found out was that 90% of your residents want a chance to make this decision. We asked whether or not the district should propose a special 2025 referendum to let voters decide whether to make investments in the middle school. Remember, in the earlier survey, we had already concluded that people believe the middle school and your oldest schools, which of course would be the middle school, need the most investment. We asked this both early in the survey and later in the survey. Early in the survey, 91% said that you should conduct a special referendum. 17% believe that strongly. Only 6% said no. By the post-test, it was still 89%. Pardon me, I'm going to take a sip of water here. With 11% saying no.
Todd's struggling a bit with a cold from the airplane.
But I'll tell you right now, Phil, there's no better place to have a staycation if you're sick than in Willow Grove. So I recommend. So who are those 11%? Okay, well, 62% of them reported that they don't follow the school district activities that closely. 75% didn't support any plan during any part of the survey. 75% believe that the funding for the school district is just fine. You should be able to use that funding for the middle school. And 57% oppose nearly any tax increase for schools. I really appreciate your patience. Next slide. We asked about the perceptions of the quality of facilities. We asked about the high school in part so we could have something to measure the middle school results against. And we asked whether you felt like it was modern, aging but functioning, past its prime, or should be replaced. As you can see, there's significantly different results for the middle school than there are for the high school. With the middle school, nearly half of the people responded that it's either past its prime or it needs replacing. Now, who believes that it's aging but just functioning? Well, it was largely people who are uninterested in the tax increase to improve schools. It's people who don't believe new schools necessarily improve communities. And it's people who are not predisposed to vote for particularly any option. By that, I mean is that they were rather equally divided between the replacement or repair. But those who also showed, who said aging, and they were divided, it's also important to point out that it was not based on how closely they followed the activities of the school district. So it wasn't necessarily people who lack knowledge of what's going on. It's just a group of people who, frankly, have different opinions about how to deal with the situation. But if you go to the people who say that the middle school is either past its prime or needs to be replaced, that group of people pretty strongly fell towards the option of replacing. For them, the question was no longer replace or repair. They really believe you have to replace. For them, the question came down to one school versus two schools in terms of replacing the existing middle school. I hope that makes sense. Once you reach the conclusion the middle school is past its prime, you are far more likely to say replace it. And then what you're wrestling with is one or two schools. Next slide. So you can remember from the first survey we did, we talked a lot about environmental factors. We didn't ask all the questions from the first survey, but we did ask three core questions, which are about the confidence in the board and the administration. Those questions are whether or not people trust you to do what's right for the children and staff of this district, that during the last couple of years, the school district has managed your budget effectively and efficiently, and whether or not you do a good job of involving community leaders, parents, and interested citizens in decisions about the school. The first thing I want you to note is for all three of those, you got remarkably positive results. And in fact, the results are extremely close to where you were back in January. Now, I think we told you back then, Peter and I have worked in a lot of school districts together, and I'm not sure we've ever seen this type of response in terms of school district decision-making. I'm glad we asked this a second time, because you always worry that, okay, if you ask it only in one survey, maybe you're getting a false positive there of some kind. That's not true at all. In fact, 72%, or almost 3/4 of people, answered yes to each of these three in terms of their trust of the school board and the administration. And of those, 85% would support a property tax increase to protect the current investment they've made in their schools, and 93% want there to be a referendum. Next slide. Now, we also asked about whether or not people believe that new local funding is needed. Rather than ask it as just one question, we split it into two. The first question was whether or not Abington schools are a good investment and you'd support a property tax increase to protect that investment. The second is whether or not you think they're adequately funded. 66% agreed that you are a good investment, that they'd support a property tax increase to protect that investment. We didn't say how much that increase was. It's just their gut reaction to that. 17% strongly agreed. When we asked about adequate funding, roughly half, or 51%, said no, you're not adequately funded. And when you take those two together, 47%, or roughly half, are supportive for new local funding, meaning that they don't think you're adequately funded, and they would support a property tax increase to protect their current investment. On top of that, another 18% are open to a property tax increase, even though they tend to believe you are adequately funded. In other words, they're the folks who would say, show me what the plan is. 96% of that group believe there should be a referendum. Next slide. So we asked about choosing between plans in several ways. We began by simply asking about the overall strategy, not talking about the cost, not talking about the tax impact. Just how should we approach this? Should the middle school be replaced? And if so, should it be replaced with one or two schools? 25% said, no, you should repair the current school. 63% said you should replace. Out of that group, more said that you should replace with one school than said you should replace with two schools, although I'll acknowledge it was very close together. When it came to the intensity, those who believe that strongly, 17% strongly believe you need replacement. Only 4% strongly believe in repair. Now, again, this is without knowing the cost, the tax impact, any of the questions like this. It's just a gut reaction. Now, your parents, and this is on the right side, 38% chose replace with one school, 37% said replace with two schools. That's 75% total. Of that group of 72% who was highly confident in the district decision-making that I talked about 2 slides ago, 39% said replace with one school, 37% said replace with two schools. Of the group that thinks that more local funding is needed, remember that 47%, 44% said replace with one school, 43% said replace with two schools. That's 87% who said replace. It's important to look at the people who are confident in what the school district is doing already, confident in board decision making, and who are natural stakeholders of the district, to look at what they think, because that's examples of people who are going to be listened to in the community by their friends and neighbors. Next slide. So next we asked about 3 referenda. Referenda A, in this case, we began to talk about the actual cost and the tax impact. So referendum A is a renovation plan at $270 million or $51 a month. Referendum B is a new school on the current campus. That's a $285 million or $54 a month. And referendum C is 2 middle schools, $450 million and $86 a month. I should point out to you that these aren't numbers that we pulled out of a hat. The ICS and Schrader teams have worked very diligently to try to determine what the right numbers are for these. And we think that that these numbers would reflect what would be put on a referendum question if any of these options were chosen. Referendum A for renovate, there was 54% support, 42% opposition. And you can see that I broke out the strong supporters in each of those also. For referendum B, the single new middle school, 60% support, 36% opposition. And for referendum C, the 2 middle schools, total support dropped to 41% and opposition to 56%. Now, if you look at that, that's the impact of telling people the cost and the tax increase every month. Once we did that for the new 2 middle schools, an option that was relatively close to 1 middle school has begun to fall off again. And the primary reason for that, from everything we've looked at in the survey, is simply the cost. They're not willing to pay that extra $32 a month to have the two schools. Then we followed that up and we asked people what the best option was and what they felt the weakest option would be. And this was really interesting to us. In terms of the best option, the winner was Referendum B, followed by Referendum C, the two schools, and Referendum A to renovate. But when we asked the weakest option, very few people said Referendum B. Far more people felt that one of the other two was the weakest option. There's a coalescing going on here around Referendum B. And the best way to explain this is to say that the people who support Referendum C as their favorite plan won't reject Referendum B just because it's only one school. And the people who believe in renovation are at least open to the idea of having a new school, particularly, I would argue, because the price is relatively close to the same. And I think that what's in the circle there is as important as anything for thinking about how to prioritize these plans. The last thing I would point out here is that 23% said when we asked the best and the weakest option that they would support no plan. Now look at Referendum B, 36% opposition and 23% said no plan at all. Basically, 2 out of every 3 opponents have decided right away, I'm not voting for anything. It doesn't matter at all. And that's going to be true, I mean, frankly, no matter what you put on the ballot. That's just a reminder, and I'm not criticizing having that opinion. Everybody gets to make their own decision about how they want money invested in public facilities. But it's just a reminder that roughly 1 out of every 4 voters simply do not want any tax increase whatsoever that would improve the schools. And that makes up most of the opposition to Referendum B. Next slide. So then we broke out those 3 groups again that we tried to look at more closely. The column in green is just a reminder of the initial support for replacement, either with 1 or 2 schools. All of these groups would support Referendum A. And what you see here when it says 71/16, that's the total support, and then we break out the strong support. They'd all support Referendum A. However, they all support Referendum B by a higher amount, and particularly those first 2 groups more intensely. And then Referendum C, while they do support them, you will notice that the groups that have the highest confidence in your decision making, it's barely a majority of 54%, and your parents are only at 52% for supporting the 2 middle school plan. Next slide. We finally asked whether or not the district was planning carefully. The first one said, are you confident that the Abington School District considering the needs of students and staff as they develop a plan for these investments? This was asked after all the referendum options were provided. 79% agreed that yes, you're considering the needs of students and staff. Note that the intensity, the strong support is a 13-to-1 ratio. We asked if you're confident that the school district is looking to invest tax dollars carefully by finding the best funding plan for facilities investments. That was 73%, with the same percentage saying strongly yes. I will tell you that it's surprising to me that this result was within 6 percentage points of the other one. We often see the folks' opinion on whether using tax dollars wisely drop off by much more, double digits, for example, than we've seen here in Abington. I am guessing a reason for that is because of the very extensive public input and information campaign that you've had to date to make sure people understand each step of the process. Now, next slide. This wasn't the only work we did. We took the exact same survey that we gave on the telephone scientific survey, and we put that online and invited every member of the public to take that survey. The important thing here, though, is that this is a self-selected sample. And every time we've done this as a firm, where we've both had a telephone survey and then an online survey, the online survey becomes dominated by school stakeholders. That is, it's not a representative population. But what I like about doing this is that it gives a lot more depth to the information from school stakeholders, especially parents. Now, of the survey, 2,164 people started the survey, which we opened a few days after the scientific survey began. and we closed it the morning of December 24th. Of the people who started the survey, 37% did not complete it. And of those, 2/3 quit by question 3. They looked at the questions and they said, nope, I don't want to do this anymore. They were just more curious. And by the time you hit question 27, which was really unwrapping the strategies, over 85% of them quit the survey. However, 1,361 people completed the survey, and that's a great amount. 44% are current parents. On the telephone survey, that's about 29%. 31% are graduates of Abington School District or parents of grads. That's relatively close to what we saw in the scientific survey. And 24% don't have a direct connection, and that's lower than we saw in the scientific survey. Next slide. So I'm showing you a few highlights here of what this data showed, and what you see here for those parents, 44% of the sample, the other connection to the school district of 31%, and having no current connection. When we asked whether we should go new or repair, the current parents felt very strongly about going new. The other two groups did not. And then we asked the people who answered new, should it be one middle school or two middle schools? Interestingly, they began by saying having a minority agree in having one middle school in all three groups. But then when we asked the specific referendum questions that included the tax impact and the cost overall, you can see some greatly different results. In the case of parents, they overwhelmingly gravitated to the one middle school referendum option. In those who have a different connection to the school district, roughly half of them would support either the remodeling or the single middle school. But support for the two middle school option really fell apart. And for those who don't have a direct connection to the Abington School District, there was a slight preference for the one middle school referendum. Then we went down and we listed all three of those again and said, pick your favorite plan. For two of the groups, it was one middle school. For the third group, it was no plan. What was the least favorite? Across the board, it was two middle schools. And whether we should hold a referendum, it was overwhelmingly support once again. Now, I'll remind you again, this is not a scientifically representative sample of the community. It just reflects the opinions of these 1,361 people. But there's 1,361 people who are interested enough in the school district to give you some data. So it's important to look at this and compare it to what we saw in the scientific survey. Phil, next slide. Now, we also did a thought exchange survey. This was done earlier than either of the previous surveys I just reported on. And the thought exchange, the goal with this was to have people who either attended the open house or watched the open house online, the presentation from it, would then follow up by taking a questionnaire that we included. It's intended to be qualitative research more than quantitative. I don't mind providing some quantitative data, but the great thing about Thought Exchange is how it uses AI to analyze qualitative answers to questions, and really, that's where you get the things like the word clouds and the tools like that you could use. But we did want to take a look at least generally where we saw support coming in. Now, not everybody watched the full video of the presentation. Some people just went in and took the questionnaire separately themselves. 61% of the respondents were parents, once again, far higher than the community as a whole. 9% were staff, 21% were the community. Of the people who responded to the survey, nearly 3/4 agreed with replacing the middle school. 63% did agree that two middle schools would likely benefit students, but the tax concerns led them still to support the one middle school option over the two middle schools once we showed them what the cost was. And in this case, what we did was we laid out several options, and then we said, now let us tell you about the cost and the tax impact of each option, and we let them answer again. And when they were identifying their important concerns, in addition to educational needs, they said safety and maintenance costs were identified as important concerns. Once again, a self-selected sample, but it's good. It's just more data, and it helps either reaffirm what we saw in a scientific survey and hopefully provides a little bit more color. Next slide. So just a reminder, a few months ago, we put this all together in 4 options. Several of these had multiple areas that we could have gone. For example, option 1 had an A and a B. Option 3 had an A and a B. They basically broke down between a single middle school building and a 2 middle school strategy, and whether or not they would have impact on the elementary school level or potentially have to see some investment in the elementary schools at the same time as the middle school. Next slide. And what we've learned from all these assessments is that, first of all, as I said, the middle school is the highest priority. We then identified the multiple options to consider. We went through a process of remodel, 1 middle school, 2 middle schools with options within each. We learned that managing tax impact was important to residents, and what we concluded was we've got to find a plan that has the best long-range value for students, staff, and residents. Now, I'm sure everybody can say that that's what you're looking for, but that's important because the best long-range value is not necessarily the least expensive plan, but it's rather how people believe their tax dollars are being used best. And as we've sought the input from the staff, the parents, and residents many times over, these are the conclusions that we've drawn. Residents want a chance to vote. Building new is preferred because continued investment in their current middle school isn't that much cheaper. And 2 middle school seems too expensive. Even the best supporters pause at the tax impact of $86 a month. So now we need to narrow this down to one plan. And Dr. Fetcher said, you guys, you come forward and tell us what you think we should do. So on the next slide, you'll see what our recommendations are, building off of the 6 options that we tested. We've taken 1A and 1B off the list. In both cases, the cost benefit, it was nearly the same cost to build 1 new school as continuing to invest in the current school. If you continue to invest in the current school, you still have an older school that's going to need more work over time. We won't fully address the educational needs that are in that middle school. And frankly, a big issue was the disruption during construction. There would be multiple classes of middle schoolers who would attend the middle school and have 1, 2, or even 3 years where they were going to school in a construction site if we remodeled the middle school. And we asked a question on that in the survey, and we found that it was a very high concern to residents to try to avoid disrupting classroom education during construction. When we looked at 3A and 3B, 3A, if you remember right, was a middle school, a new one on the current site, and then one at Glenside Weldon. We found that the site was probably not suitable for the needs of a new middle school. And that was through informal conversations that we've had with other local officials in the area. 3B would have a new one, a different new school at Copper Beach. But what we found there was that, and along with option number 4, which would create the grades 5, 6, and 7, and 8 plan, that the educational benefit seemed strong to people, but the additional cost caused public support to wane, even for parents. As importantly, nearly everybody who supported option 3 or option 4 also would support option 2. Finally, and we didn't test this at all, but we at least wanted to make sure that we made this comment for you, that options 3 and 4 would result in additional ongoing operating costs if you have 2 middle schools instead of just 1. That puts pressure on your current general fund. And let's face it, what we're trying to do here is find a funding source that doesn't put pressure on your ongoing classroom needs. Bill? So that's the results of the research that we've done, and we're here to answer any questions that you have about it.
So I know that was a lot of information. We are happy to field questions, unpack any additional information you may need. I have David Schrader with me as well if you have architectural questions or any process questions as well.
Thank you for the presentation. Any questions or comments from the board?
I have a question to start. Could you expand on timeframes for the options? I'd like to hear specifically for option 2, best estimate you have on when residents would expect the project to be completed and start to finish, and then in comparison to some of the other options that have been on the table and explored.
Sure. Option 2. So you always have a design and a municipal approval process. So that's 12 to 18 months, depending on how quickly you could get that done. From there, you have a construction process for the building. That's 30 to 36 months, somewhere in that time frame, depending on how the final building looks and operates. After that, you still have a year, roughly, of the demolition of the existing building and then the relocation of the fields. So if you remember where we're building or where the building would be built, you would be relocating one of those athletic fields. So that would need to be done in the year after that. If you look back into any of the renovation strategies, you can add an additional year to year and a half to that just for the shuffling of students, because we would have to have a significant amount of modular classrooms so that we could create what's called swing space, so you could operate or work on part of the building while those students are being educated in a modular classroom form.
Okay, so it's, from what I'm hearing you say, and I just want to be clear, I've had a lot of residents ask me this recently. The best estimate for replace with one middle school is 4 to 5 years. It sounds like, based on the numbers. And you're saying that that is the shortest amount of time in the options available, that the other options presented would add an additional year to 18 months
That is correct.
minimally to it.
That
Okay.
is correct.
Could I just ask a follow-up clarification? So 4 to 5 years is start to finish, design to field relocation and demolition, correct? So how long to occupancy of a new middle school?
So remember, so it's about 12 to 18
Right.
months on the design,
Right.
and 30 to 36 months in the construction. So at the end of that, you could occupy that building.
Okay.
So then you still have other work going on site, but the building would be occupied, and necessarily the other building would be unoccupied, because that building would have to be demoed.
Correct.
So,
Okay.
sorry, did that answer your question? Or
I think so. Thank you.
I can build a graphic, which would be probably helpful, because I know this has come up a couple times, and I believe I have one in one of the presentations, but I will send that to the board just for
Okay.
clarification.
Thank you.
Could you remind all of us of the current status of the middle school, the cost of the deferred maintenance that we've already identified as needing to occur, and the ramifications of not going to referendum and how that could impact the budget in the long term? And I know that might be answered by multiple individuals here.
No worries. I'll start with the first one. So if you remember, the very first thing we did over 2 years ago was just a condition assessment of the existing building. That condition assessment showed about $206 million worth of just maintenance, deferred maintenance that was needed. So regardless of what you do, that investment will have to be made in the building over the next several years. Many of these systems are well beyond their useful life. Many are failing. They are not failed, but failure is inherently unpredictable. So you have very large systems, and money will need to be invested. The tricky thing is, if you wait to try to make a decision at that point, you may have to invest money along the way, meaning if you did want to make a decision at some time in the future, you would have kind of thrown good money after bad. So you're at a point right now where you can make a clean decision and hopefully, make the best decision for this community, and maybe avoid some of that investment that you may need to make in the near future. That was the first part of your question, but I'm sorry. Please remind me the second part.
The long-term budget impact of not going to referendum and just paying for these items as they come along.
So, you would then have to do all of this under your Act 1 operating budget. So, I'm not sure that, I'm not in the best position to answer that, but I don't believe that the district's finances are in a position to do that. So to invest that money, you would certainly have to be taking from the educational program, teaching, learning, those kind of programs, to then shift resources into construction. I think what you're asking about the referendum is that allows you to have a specialized portion outside of your Act 1 that funds this program for the long period or for the long time. So it would have a minimal impact on your operating budget. Now, the only other options that would be the two building options. Any of those two building options would have ongoing operational costs, because will be some duplication of efforts, nursing, food service, those kind of things. You do get economies of scale in a single building. So you'd have to consider that in any of the two building options. The minimum estimate of that was about $1.5 million per year of additional just staffing costs and operational costs that go along with that, not inclusive of the construction costs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There was a part of Mr. Muhammad's question that I know there was a bunch of them. Can you speak to the most pressing issues at the current middle school that would need to be addressed?
I might phone a friend to David. He did a lot of the condition assessment. Sure.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure which system to hone in on. The HVAC systems are having challenges, as you probably know, and will continue to. The building envelope is really one of our bigger challenges. The exterior window systems, roofing that goes along with that, everything on the perimeter of the building. So when you lump together the HVAC, the building envelope, and then of course lighting and electrical, you're kind of down to the structure. And so those are the kinds of things that we are looking at as things you'll have to deal with in the very near future.
So you're saying the cost to maintain those things over the years could conceivably cost the same amount that it would cost to actually build a new school?
It is very similar. So the analysis that we did initially says $206 million just to replace all those systems, and they are all in need of replacement. There's very little that we can reuse within the building. So if you look at the renovate add strategy, there's almost every system needs to be replaced. There's literally nothing to be reused except, as David said, the structure of the concrete.
And how would that cost compare to a replacement?
So the replacement value is $285 million. So it's you got a little bit of there's a significant difference there. Now, remember, the replacement option gives you more square footage than you have now. Your existing square footage is about 300,000 square feet. The program that was done, the program that the educators would like to run, require 345,000 square feet. So you are comparing a little bit of apples and oranges there. If you were to build out the program or build out the existing building to the program needs, you're then a lot closer. And I will look this up, and I believe it is 270 million compared to 285 million. So you're getting a lot closer to the same cost.
I think it's about a difference of about $3 a month.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
Slide 9.
Just wanted to add on those elements that you mentioned. You didn't mention ADA accessible standards for the building. You also didn't mention like a fire system or a sprinkler system to protect our, 21? How many kids do we have in that building, Dr. Fetcher?
Almost 2,200.
2,200 students. So those are two large elements that you didn't mention in those renovations that I think the residents, should be aware of as well.
Well, there's a significant, thank you for bringing those points up. And remember, we also looked at things like the little theater and some of the functionality of different spaces throughout the facility. We were just talking about systems at that point in time, but truly accessibility throughout the facility, usability of that building, the way that it's set up for today's educational structure. And that sort of eases into, from earlier presentations, that middle of the road concept that Phil just talked about, which is the demolition of some, replacement of some, to try to get some of those spaces up to par, really. Yep.
And also just to clarify, like, should that happen and those needs need to be met, which speaking as a parent, those are very important needs. That would have to happen while the students are occupying the building in this scenario. So all these updates that you're mentioning right here would mean the students, the staff, the learning, the curriculum, how it's being executed on a daily basis. I mean, long-term projects, the public health standards and safety concerns that we would have as a result of demolition and remodeling on a 1964-year-old building, and the products used then. So those would all be considerations that would happen as we moved along that process as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you've got it nailed. I mean, anytime we're going to try to fix something in this existing building, it's occupied. And all the systems are so large that it's not that you can't really just do them over a summer. Any one of the systems that David discussed, any of the ADA upgrades, they're going to take more than a summer. Even HVAC, even roofing, the building's so massive, that's more than a summer project. So all of them would need to take place during an occupied time frame. In addition, if you wait until something fails to address it, there are a lot of secondary downstream issues with that. So one, you don't have a lot of options about upgrading a system. You almost have to go with a like-for-like replacement because you're going to be in an emergency. Two, when you do something in an emergency format, it does cost more. You've got to expedite materials, and some materials are not even available in an expedited fashion today. There's still supply chain issues stemming from the pandemic. So many of these things would be very problematic to try to react to versus to plan for, if that's what you're getting at, because that's certainly an issue here, especially with how obsolete many of the systems are.
Right.
Fire systems, all of those things would also need to be upgraded. There's almost nothing you could do in this building that would not trigger a total code required upgrade. In addition to that, there are rules about how that works. So any major replacement, HVAC or otherwise, would then trigger all the other ADA compliance issues and code issues.
So though option 2 is slightly more expensive, you eliminate the interruption to learning that's going to occur, where students and staff and the entire community is going to be highly impacted by in a negative way. You have a little bit more cost, but it's still not at the higher end of some of the options we saw before. And so students and staff see this building come up, move into the building, and then they see the old building eventually come down.
That is exactly correct. Yep.
Maybe one. And that's probably, the end result is critical, obviously. What you end up with as a district is critically important, processes as well. And so the point you've made is either you're going to have a new building standing on the site, students will be going in an unaltered facility, move into the new facility, and then the old building comes down. So they're not living through the construction in the buildings. They will on the site. Everybody's going to have to bear with the site. In the renovation option, we have built-in modular classrooms, so you can move entire groups of students out into the modular classrooms, and they'll continue to move around the building as parts of the building are renovated and finished. So there is some disruption in the process while the students are going to school, while the construction's occurring, correct?
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Yeah, so if, I'm sorry.
Please.
Okay. So if if the public decides that we're not going to go with any of these options, am I correct in saying that we will eventually end up spending the same amount of money correcting problems in a reactive fashion, probably down the line, and not have a new building to show for it? Is that correct?
That's correct. And you still have to apply the inflationary factors to that. That 206 is today's dollars, right?
Okay.
So as you inflate them to the future, it's going to be more than that. So yeah, that's the floor, not the ceiling, if you will.
Okay.
Just a few comments. I believe most of my questions have been answered. I just wanted to comment on the transparency of this process and how much information the public has access to. And I want to thank you for the hard work that has gone into that, including creating a calculator so each individual residents can look up their information and see how these choices impact them individually. I think that was huge. I also wanted to highlight that the surveys that were done, two of them scientific and two of them just general, anyone who wants to give feedback, were similar in nature. And it looks like the majority of our community members in Abington and Rockledge would like to proceed with option 2. I think it would behoove us as a board to be able to give feedback to Dr. Fetcher and his staff about what option we would like, given community input, we would like to move forward with, so that the next meeting they can present what that referendum would look like.
Could I ask one more question just before we do that?
You could even ask more than one.
Great, thanks. I just want to get to it. I agree, though. Regarding, I can't remember what slide it was, but you said, I think I just remember seeing the number 54 per month. I believe that was option.
Slide 9.
Thank you. Can you explain for what value, home value that is? And I'm assuming that's the average value for an Abington resident. Just clarify that.
That is the median homestead value.
Okay.
That's the same value that Mr. Leonetti uses as the median. So it's
In the middle.
I think it's typical for you to see that as a median taxpayer.
Okay. Thanks. I just wanted to know that for sure.
Did you want to know what that house value was? I'm sorry, I just wanted to make sure your question is
Actually,
answered.
yes. Thanks. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, we have it
What
as
that correlates with too.
$387,402.
Any other questions?
Just want to make comments because I feel like there's been so many good questions. But to say thank you for the presentation, and also thank you to everyone who answered surveys, answered phone surveys, went ahead and took the survey, because this information is super valuable and important to us in making the decision on what to do going forward. So thank you, everyone, for your involvement.
Oh, Brian, sorry.
I would like to make a comment. I think all of my questions have been answered. This has been extremely thorough and comprehensive. As Ms. Brown had said about like feedback, I do agree with the direction. I think that, especially based off of the scientific data that was presented tonight by Todd, it's pretty clear of what the community wants when we factor in the dollars and cents. And I definitely could support putting to referendum for the one referendum B or option 2, the one new middle school. I think that makes the most sense, and it's also backed up by the data of the community in terms of what we can afford.
Okay. Anyone? Sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah. At the beginning of last year, the residents shared that they had concerns about the middle school, which was backed up by the study of the building the year prior. And so we'd seen that was a concern. The residents shared that they would like to see something be done about those issues, and they threw out all sorts of ideas, and we were all wrestling with those ideas and have been wrestling with those ideas for about 2 years now. And here we are. The residents said we would love to see 2 middle schools, but we don't have the tax tolerance for 2 middle schools. Some people said we're okay with just renovating and expanding or just doing the maintenance. But we see that the cost is about the same as the one new school option. And the one new school option is less disruptive and will yield benefits when it comes to the makeup of the school, the flexibility of the school, being able to offer innovative academic programming to future generations of students in Abington and Rockledge. And so I would totally support the one new middle school option and hope to see that put forth in the next meeting.
Kathy?
I walk around with my dog in the neighborhood, and people now know I'm on the school board, so they stop and ask me questions. A few of them says, why do we need a new middle school? Well, last week I had the opportunity to take a tour of the middle school because I had never been in there besides the little theater. Yes, I could clearly see we do need a new middle school. And I was happy to have that tour. That way I can intelligently speak to people who don't think we need to spend the money. Now, I'm in that bracket with a senior. I've lived in the township for 29 years. My mortgage will be done next year. So I'll have to pay the increase in full write a check, not in a mortgage. So somebody like myself, we will feel the impact a lot more than somebody having a $50 increase to their mortgage. But it's, I mean, it's just like it's a no-brainer. It's just something that we really need to do for the community and for the Abington students. So I have to support it. Personally, I did like the two-school option, but it's just too cost prohibitive. So I would support the one.
Okay. Anyone else have anything else to add?
I'll go. I originally, when we were given the options, as an educator, I thought the two-school option was definitely the best one. As we worked through the last year, through the process, we realized for many reasons it's probably not feasible. Financially, the options are just way more expensive, and the operating costs would be too much. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is how to make one big middle school feel smaller on the inside. And I think that that's something design-wise that we would want to look at if we could do it so that it's not just one big school with 3 floors. It's, got smaller areas for smaller groups of kids, because I think all of us feel that 2,200 kids in the middle school is a lot. And exploring ways that we can make it feel a little bit smaller and more community-based as we move forward, if this is the option that, we decide on. But I do want to thank everyone who took the time to respond to the surveys. We really have taken all of that information into account. And we've spent countless hours with, ICS, and thank you so much for all the information that you give us. And I feel pretty confident that after looking at the data, that the one new middle school feels like the best option for Abington right now.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to add, the process has been interesting thus far, and the time and energy and the layers of feedback that we've received throughout, I guess, over the last year. Additionally, one of the biggest concerns that I saw with this was some of the public health things that I brought up in my questions today. And it feels good to know that the residents are looking at options that are considering that, the safety of our students, the safety of the staff, and long-term solutions for the best value of the community. I would be happy to support it. And ultimately, it going to referendum, it really does make this a community-based decision. It's not just about any one of us sitting here or any one of the 1,300 people that took the non-scientific survey, or the 500 people that took the scientific survey, or the handful of people that I talk to on a regular basis, or the countless numbers of people that showed up at one of the open houses, or that grab one of each, us in the street, or when we're on the bus stops waiting for our kids, or just talking to your neighbors or friends. It's an opportunity for all of us to collectively come together and make the decision for what's best for the community. So yes, I would support option 2, and I would support it going, for the voters to make the final decision.
So I want to thank you guys for a great presentation, for your hard work up until now. I know we have had a lot of questions throughout this process, and you've been very accommodating, very forthcoming in answering those. So I'm thankful for that. I also want to thank my fellow board members tonight for their thoughtful questions. This is a group undertaking. Many of us think of questions that the others don't, and I feel like that was on really impressive display tonight. I would add a couple of thoughts to the points that others have made. For me, I agree that the solution that seems to rise to the top for many of the people who participated in the various surveys is the second one. And I'm happy to support that. I was also struck by how many people who participated in those surveys wanted an opportunity to vote, to make a decision on this for the community, for the students. And so I certainly want to add my thanks to the people who participated in those surveys. But I could not, in good conscience, having seen those survey results, deny them the opportunity to weigh in through a referendum question. And I think, finally, my kids started in this district right after the big investment in the grade schools. I think my daughter was in the second class to start at Highland. And one of the reasons we moved to Abington is because we saw it as a community that cared about education, that was willing to make investments in facilities and curricula for students. There were school board members and residents who voted to support the building of those new grade schools, schools that benefited my kids. And I cannot, in good conscience, deny students who have yet to come through our schools the same opportunity. And so, unless I'm mistaken, Dr. Fetcher, I believe the board is directing you to prepare a referendum question to be voted on the next meeting's agenda.
Okay, will do.
Okay, thank you.